Hi, I'm Steve Akalis. I am the author of the avirescue.com and beaconreviews.com websites. I'm also an Avalanche educator, a part-time ski patroller at Brighton Ski Resort in Utah, and the former commander of the Salt Lake County Search and Rescue Team. This is part 2 of a 2-part video series. This video covers the actual rescue process. Part 1 covers topics that you should consider before you enter avalanche terrain. I encourage you to watch both videos because the information presented in part 1 is very relevant to executing a successful rescue. Although it's certainly reasonable to watch part 2 first and then watch part 1. You can access these videos by visiting avirescue1.com and avirescue2.com. Look, I realize these videos are much longer than your typical YouTube video, but it does take more than a 5-minute video to become proficient in avalanche rescue. Likewise, these videos are not intended to take the place of a hands-on avalanche course or a frequent practice on your part. Both of those are important elements to becoming proficient as an avalanche rescuer. So, avalanche rescue is made up of these main parts. You do a scene size up where you consider safety, get situational awareness, begin to gather information. You do a clue search, which is kind of like a visual search for any signs of what's happened, as well as sort of a continuation of that information gathering. You do a transceiver search, which involves 3 parts, which I'll cover. You search with your avalanche probe to confirm the transceiver search. You shovel to extricate the person. You provide medical care once they're out, and you transport them to the front country. I'm going to only be able to briefly touch on medical care and kind of breeze over transportation, but these are the main steps. All right, so we've had an avalanche accident, and let's go through the process. There you are, dressed in your nice red onesie. So there's been an avalanche. What's the first thing you do? Yeah, yell, avalanche, right? Echo that with other folks. So now the first step in that series of avalanche rescue steps is a scene size up. You gain situational awareness, get organized. This is made up of 4 main points. You consider safety, establish leadership, gather information, and consider calling for help. So let's look at each one of those. On the safety front, your safety comes first. Your safety comes first. You got to take care of yourself, get out of harm's way, because you want to survive uninjured so that you're able to rescue your partner. Then, as a safety consideration, you want to consider, is there a remaining hazard? Snow that's above the crown where the avalanche started is called hang fire. You can see we've got significant hang fire in this picture. Left undisturbed, like no one's skiing on it and not a lot of loading, I'm not aware of any case where hang fire has come down onto following an avalanche accident and affected rescuers. Now, that's sort of in the period immediately after the accident where a rescue took place. You also want to consider, are there additional avalanche paths? So maybe you were in this path that avalanched naturally from snow load, maybe buried one of your partners, and there's other avalanche paths that flow into your avalanche path that are likewise getting loaded the way yours was. So you got to consider risk maybe coming from other places that hasn't been disturbed. You also want to consider, is the snow still loading, right? Is there still wind or snowfall or rain, something applying load to that snow that might have caused it to avalanche in the first place? You want to consider getting to an island, quote, of safety if you're still in very exposed terrain. That might be in dense trees. It might be along a ridge line that's away from other slopes that could avalanche on you. And in many, probably most cases, being on the avalanche bed surface is an island of safety, because it's, unless there's like these multiple paths or a lot of hang fire above you, it's a safe location. And then you want to change into search mode, sort of as part of this process, so that you won't interfere with the avalanche. Next is establishing leadership. Someone needs to explicitly take charge, right? It's often obvious who will be the search leader, either due to experience. You already sort of have this unannounced hierarchy of like who's most experienced as a rescuer or as a leader. But it's important to do this explicitly, right? I'll be the leader. I'm going to be the leader. You know, determine who's missing and begin to organize things. A leader's role is to direct resources, like make assignments, make sure that things are getting done, to avoid duplication of tasks, to be the information hub, and to be thinking about what needs to be done. These are basic principles of the instant command system. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this tape, they become more important as you increase the number of people. But even with a small number of people, it's important to explicitly establish leadership. Next, you want to gather information. You want to know how many people were buried. Yeah, maybe you saw Sarah get buried, but is everyone else on the surface, right? Is Mark still okay, right? Is the rest of your party okay? Or is other people buried that you might not have been aware of? So determine who is missing. You want to know if they were wearing transmitters. If this is part of your party and you did a trail side check, you should know if they have an avalanche transceiver and it was on. But if you arrive on scene and of an avalanche accident and begin to help, it might be good to know like how many people and where they're wearing transceiver. And then you want to determine the area last seen, like in this slope, where were they last seen? The fourth part of this scene size up is considering calling for help. The rule of thumb is don't call for help until it won't affect survivability. It won't decrease survivability, right? I guess I had a double negative in that, but don't call for help if it's going to decrease survivability. So that almost always means you shouldn't call for help until they're breathing. Remember, 80% are alive after 10 minutes. Less than 50%, fewer than 50%, are alive after 15 minutes. So you don't want to spend 1 or 3 or 5 minutes on the phone. You want to execute a rescue, get that person's airway open. There are a couple of exceptions to this. Maybe you've got some unskilled people on the surface who aren't skilled in avalanche rescue, and you can just have that person, call 911, tell them we've had an avalanche accident and give them our location, right? You can just assign that to someone who wouldn't, then that doesn't affect the survivability. The other thing is if you've got a lot of rescuers, maybe you've got 8 people on the surface and all 8 of you don't need to do a signal search, right? So one of those people can call for help. But the smaller the team, the more important it is to get that person breathing and to delay the call for help. If you do call for help, it's important to make it clear that it's an avalanche accident. Many call centers, 911 centers, aren't familiar with avalanche backcountry rescues and may launch fire departments that go to a trailhead and aren't going to be effective at executing this rescue. So making them know that it's a backcountry avalanche accident and then giving a location. Lat long is wonderful for rescuers, or else using a well-known name for that area, a common name that's used for that terrain. Let's see, my slides stopped advancing. There we go. So summary of the scene size up, basically consider safety, get situational awareness, get organized. This takes place up front. This does not take long. These steps, safety, leadership, information, and help, probably take 30 seconds to a minute. It's easy to forget to do this stuff for all of us and to just want to charge in and help. But firefighters don't charge into burning buildings, right? You stop and figure out what's going on. Protect yourself, obtain situational awareness, establish leadership, get some information, and figure out if you're going to need help, additional resources at that moment. All right, let's look at the clues search. This is sort of the eyeball search, just looking at it and saying, what do I see? Are there skis, hats, anything on the surface? Because that's probably a good indication of the flow of the avalanche and where it's likely to find the person. You want to consider the last seen area. And it's been marked here, like, why is that important? And it's like, yeah, because it can really reduce the amount of terrain that you're going to need to search. In this case, it's reduced it by 2/3 the amount of terrain that you'll need to search. You can see that incorrectly identifying the last seen area of the LSA could be a big problem. If you start much lower than where the person is, you may get all the way down to the bottom and then realize that you've missed them and need to travel back up through the slope. You might consider marking the last seen location, or at least agreeing with it with your partners, like, that's where I saw them last. And that's where you're going to begin your search. And then from that last seen area, you want to consider sort of their trajectory and catchment areas, like where it might be likely that they're found, like if there's a clump of trees below them where they might have gotten caught up. During this clue search, you want to inspect any clue you see. So if it's a ski or a ski pole or a piece of a snowmobile or pieces of clothing, you want to inspect them and yell it out. Like, I've got a ski, I found a ski. Stand it up so that other people know it, and that sort of gives additional situational awareness to the rest of the rescuers. Oftentimes, rescuers have found something, a ski, gone to lift it up, and found that it's still attached to a rescuer. I worked an avalanche accident where one of the rescuers said, I got a glove, went over and grabbed the glove, and it was still on the hand of the avalanche victim. So inspect every clue, announce it, and pick it up or pull on it. You want to leave that gear in place. You don't want to move it away from where it was found, and you don't want to contaminate the avalanche field with your own gear. So rescuer gear, skis, poles, gloves, backpacks should not get left in the avalanche area. That can distract rescuers by contaminating the area and destroying the clues that we have. Part of clues, if you weren't involved in the party, is to do a witness interview. So that includes things like how many victims, how many people are missing, were they wearing avalanche transceivers and were they transmitting, where was that last seen area, how long ago did this avalanche take place. If it's been a couple of hours, you might be less willing to expose yourself to risk in this rescue. And has anybody called for help yet? And making that decision, that sort of scene size up decision about calling for help. So we've completed that scene size up. We've considered the last seen area and the surface clues. Now we're going to go into the avalanche transceiver search. This is done in these 3 phases: signal search, course search, find search. I'm going to go through each one of these. So the signal search, the purpose of a signal search, the goal of a signal search is to get a signal. Everyone's changed into search mode. You want to get a strong signal. That's the goal. If you switch your transceiver into search mode and immediately hear beep, 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 and have a direction indicator, you've already completed the signal search. Okay? It's already been completed. If you don't receive a signal, then you're going to want to zigzag down the slope trying to get a signal. So you can see in this case, we haven't received a signal yet. There's no distance or directional indicator. So we're going to zigzag down the slope. The zigzagging should be done with no more than 100 feet between each of the zigzags. You want to get within 100 feet, less than 100 feet, of anywhere you've zigzagged. The reason we're zigzagging is we want to get close to that victim. These pick up sort of a circular area around us, and we want each one of our zigs and zags to overlap our previous paths to increase the likelihood that we're going to pick up a signal. Sure, if the slide was only 100 feet wide, you could go right down the middle, or if you had multiple people in a wider slide, you can go right down it. But basically, you want to get less than 100 feet between every zig and zag. and within about half of that, so less than 50 feet from either edge. And for me, just because I want it simple, I just think less than 100 feet and I go wall to wall, unless it's a really big avalanche where I need to be a little more efficient. The amount of time you save doing a wider signal search strip width, you probably aren't increasing your time dramatically, and you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to miss the victim on your way down, and the amount of time you lose having to research that area will be significant. Performing a signal search, a successful signal search, has a lot more to do with picking an appropriate search strip width than it does with any electronic skill. You're just trying to pick up a signal. You want to move quickly and deliberately. Quickly and deliberately. That can be really difficult on avalanche debris. Our little skier here glides along quite smoothly, but it's likely you'll have to take your skis off and run on the snow surface, or if you're on a snowmobile, leave your snowmobile and do some zagging. And remember, you may be searching from the bottom up, the bottom of the slope upwards anyway. There's a number of you skiing or watching someone on a snowmobile. You may be at the bottom when the accident occurs and you have to head uphill. So we still haven't received a signal. We continued skiing on until we receive a strong signal. By strong signal, I mean the number is displayed, the distance, repeatedly, and you have a steady direction indicator, an arrow on this transceiver. Some transceivers might beep a number a few times, 3 or 4 times, and then it goes blank, or the arrow appears and then disappears. It means you're getting close to a signal, but you haven't gotten close enough, so you should continue your signal search, maybe with a little tighter zigzags between it, till you receive a strong signal, which we've done here. When you receive that signal, you've completed your signal search. It's a good time to become aware of where you are when that signal was received. You might just notice, oh, I'm next to that rock band, but just have an idea of it, just so you can return to that location if necessary. You also want to be communicating, like, I got a signal, I got a signal. Let your partners know, again, for situational awareness. If you've got a strong signal, they don't need to keep zigzagging if you know that there's one person there. All right, so our next phase in this is called the course search. The goal of the course search is to get within a few meters, probably 3 to 5 meters, so like 10 to 15 feet from the transmitting beacon. If we think of the signal search as running, the course search is more of a brisk walk. You're moving quickly and deliberately, but not at the speed that you would have done the signal search, where you are just trying to find a signal. So this is our brisk walk. You're going to follow the directional indicator, the arrow or lights that are displayed on your transceiver. As that arrow moves around, you'll move your avalanche transceiver until the arrow is aligned in the center, and then you'll follow in that direction. As you're following your arrow lined up straight ahead of you, sort of held off of your belly, you want to watch the distance numbers decrease. This is really important because here we've got an avalanche transceiver in the snow, and it sends the signal out in this pattern of flux lines. It's not only flat the way it's drawn here, but it's all through the air. If you held an avalanche transceiver, this is not one, it's sending this signal up and it's coming back in all directions. And the searching transceiver, as it has these 2 antennas that try to line up with the signal, all it's really doing is lining you up with these lines. And the device doesn't know if it's lined up on the line pointing toward the victim or lined up pointing away from the victim, as is happening with our rescuer here, right? So this is showing 24 meters. And as the person continues, oh, it's gone up to 28. So you want to go until it's undeniably, maybe it goes 24, 26. It's like, oh, I think I'm going the wrong direction. But go a little further until you're sure it's increasing. And if it's increasing, turn around, okay? But it's worth going a little bit until there's no doubt that it's increasing, so you don't kind of get caught in going back and forth. So in this case, our rescuer turns around, begins to head out and sees that the numbers are, it's decreasing. You can see how usually this will guide you in on a curved path, depending on where you were on relative to the direction this transceiver is bearing. The arrow disappears at about 3 meters. So here our rescuer is going to follow the arrow in. You can see now that the transceiver is showing 3 meters and the arrow has disappeared. During this time, you want to kind of pay attention as you slow down a little bit as you get closer. Somewhere around 3 to 5 meters, you want to stop, and that's where you've completed your core search and are going to begin this next search, which is called the find search. The goal of the find search is to get the shortest distance, to find the shortest distance where your transceiver is closest to the buried victim. If we think of the signal search as the pace of a run, we think of the course search, curving in, as a brisk walk. Think of the find search as a crawl. In fact, should do this on your hands and knees, get really low down to the surface. You want to definitely slow down in your course search as you get around 10 meters and 5 meters as you're kind of landing, about to transition to your find search. In your find search, you'll move quite slowly. So in your find search, you want to continue it in the same direction that you were coming in on your course search. I find it helpful to take a ski, if I'm on skis and not on a snowmobile, and stick it into the snow in the direction that I was coming in on the course search, basically the arrow that I was coming in on my course search. That's a great reminder to myself, my fellow rescuers, that that's the direction I'm traveling, and it's really likely that the victim is going to be buried in line with that pointer. You need to keep your transceiver pointed in the same direction throughout that search. You don't want to rotate it side to side. You want to keep it in that same orientation, and you want to keep it near the snow surface. That decimal portion shown on the transceiver is 1/10 of a meter. It's 10 centimeters, about the length of a cigarette. So if you move your transceiver inadvertently, just the height of a cigarette, it will appear that you're getting further away or closer to the Avalanche transceiver when you really aren't. The goal is to bracket to find the shortest distance. So this process involves moving forward in the same direction as your course search, not rotating your transceiver or changing its height until the numbers undeniably increase. When you're sure they're increasing, move your transceiver back to the lowest distance. Next, you want to move your transceiver to the side, either left or right, until the numbers undeniably increase. One little blip increase isn't enough. You need to keep moving it until it undeniably increases, and then move it the other direction until it undeniably increases, and then come back to the center, to the lowest point. This is the part of avalanche rescue and using a transceiver that people struggle with. Undeniably, this requires practice. People often want to just randomly look for a short number or move really quickly trying to find a short number. You can't find a transmitting beacon like that. You need to do this bracketing, forward and backward to find the low number, side to side to do the number. If you do a good job, you can do it with just one forward and back and one side to side. It doesn't need a lot of repeating. Maybe you can do a third one to narrow it down. Remember, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And these things only let out not a thing, but a transceiver only lets out a beep about every second. So if you're moving really quickly, the receiving device is not getting many signals. It needs to just be moved at a steady pace so it has a chance to receive these signals. Forward and back till you find the low point. Side undeniably increases, side undeniably increases, back to the center. Then you want to mark that point where you got the lowest distance. You want to mark it, maybe with a ski pole if you're a skier, maybe with a piece of clothing like a hat or something, although those can get knocked away, or maybe just punch or make a really big, obvious swirl or something in the snow. So let's review what we've covered thus far. So we do this scene size up, right? We gain protect our safety, get situational awareness. It's that safety, leadership, information, and help phase. We do a clue search where we look for the last seen area. We look for skis or gear on the surface, parts of snowmobiles. We do a signal search beginning at the last seen area. We zigzag back and forth, no more than 100 feet between our strips and going half of that, 50 feet or less to the sides. When we receive a strong signal, we then perform our course search, which we do by aligning the direction indicator, watching the numbers decrease. We come in until we're within 3 to 5 meters. We've completed the course search. We get down on the ground and we do this bracketing of the find search. So our next step, so we've used these expensive electronic devices, right, to get really close to the victim. We're probably within a meter vertically of the victim. Now we're going to start poking sticks in the snow, probing to try to find the person. I think of it as like caveman searching. Pretty primitive after using an avalanche transceiver, but extremely effective, right? You will not get a false negative using a probe. It's archaic, but it's reliable. The probe is designed to sort of feel, certainly not to perforate, but you're feeling what's underneath the surface. People and backpacks, but just people, body tissue, has just a little bit of a springy, think of it as a boingy feel to it that is unlike what would be buried in the snow otherwise. You'll also know if you hit something because your probe won't go down in the snow. You'll push it here and it'll go down, whatever, 5 feet or 6 feet. And you'll push it here and it'll only go down 3 feet and it'll hit something. There's different kinds of probes. There are collapsible probes, which is what we all use, which is what you will use, 240 plus centimeters in length. They fold up kind of like a tent pole with a band inside, not elastic, but a cable inside. There are also convertible poles made out of ski poles. These things are really slow to assemble and are not sturdy. Maybe you could use them as a backup, but they're not acceptable as your primary probe. And then for group rescue, sometimes they'll use one piece probe, sometimes longer, sometimes just available for a lot of people to probe. This might be pieces of bamboo or conduit or rods, steel rods. There are 3 different probing techniques. There is probing after a transceiver search, spot probing, just high probability areas, and probe lines. And I'm going to explain each of these. So when you're probing following a transceiver search, you want to hold your probe at 90 degrees relative to the snow surface, because that's going to be the closest distance from where you get the lowest number with your find search to the transceiver that's attached to the victim. If you hold the probe vertically, stick it vertically into the snow, you'll actually end up downhill of the victim. You'll still find them as you expand your probe, but you'll lose time. So try to get in the habit of doing this 90 degrees relative to the snow surface. This is a little challenging in practice because usually when we practice probing, we're doing it on a flatter terrain. So it's good to keep in mind you're really probing 90 degrees relative to the snow surface. Transceiver probing, you put a hole at the low point from the find search, and then you do a series of expanding circles with 10-inch increments. So 10 inches is like a stretched out decaying signal, maybe a couple inches more, 10 inches. So you do one, you come out and do a circle around it, and come out and do a circle around it with the holes at 10-inch intervals. This is referred to as an expanding circle technique. Some people do a spiral. In either case, you want a probe hole every 10 inches, and you want to be efficient. You need to be quick on this. Don't waste time, right? Time is what's going to save your friend, your partner. If you did a good job with your avalanche, during your find search, you ought to get a probe strike on a person-sized or a backpack-sized target within either your first or second circle. However, if you go further than that and still haven't gotten a strike, I'd say resist the temptation to go back to your transceiver. If you did a poor job in your find search with your transceiver in the first place, going back and doing it again, it's likely you will do a poor job again. I'd say in most cases, it's better to just continue to expand your circle. Your probe will hit the person as long as you got reasonably close with your find search. So next is spot probing. That was transceiver probing. Spot probing is just probing high probability areas. This might be in the fall line from the last place that you saw the person. It might be around surface clues like a snowmobile or skis or other gear that you saw. Maybe in catchment areas like uphill of a tree or in a depression or in the toe of the slide. When you're doing spot probing, you should only probe 6 feet in deep. You don't need to go a lot deeper because it's really unlikely that someone will survive a burial of deeper than 6 feet. So the time you save only probing 6 feet deep will be time that you can spend probing in more locations. So probe a lot of locations up to 6 feet deep. When you're spot probing, you can probe it on the angle, underneath trees, poke it in any direction you want. So why would we spot probe? Yeah, well, the victim wasn't wearing an Avalanche transceiver possibly, or is no longer transmitting, possibly due to trauma on that Avalanche transceiver hitting a tree. Or maybe just because you've got a lot of people arrive on scene and you have enough resources that folks can be just spot checking high probability areas. I'll now talk a little bit about probe lines. These are used when you haven't received a signal to see if someone is buried. Either they weren't transmitting or their transmitter isn't working, which is pretty rare that one's not working. And you've got a lot of resources. These are commonly used during a group rescue. You've got a lot of resources, a lot of people on scene. They've arrived later. This is often for a recovery rather than a rescue. But you can also have a small group of 3 or 4 people, high probability area, person isn't wearing a beacon. You can line up and do a really quick probe line search on a limited area. I'm going to kind of quickly go through how a group probe line works with approximately 12 people. So the rescue should have a leader. The leader's job is to organize the team, to ensure proper spacing, and to ensure that the area gets searched. You then have these probers who line up. They're spaced 5 feet apart. They're faced uphill. It's much easier to probe facing uphill. You don't have to do as much stooping as if you probe downhill. And these probes should be held vertically, like to gravity. This will help our leader sight along the top of those poles to kind of see a contour of the ground or to see if one of them isn't going as deep. So it's just another way of maybe someone spotting that there's been a probe by strike. In order to achieve this 5-foot spacing, rescuers can stretch out palm to palm. That's about 5 feet between people. Excuse my little G.I. Joe looking rescuers, but that's what I have. 5-foot spacing ensures that if people probe 3 times, left, center, right, that the probes will be about 20 inches apart, which is 50 centimeters. Probing a 50 centimeter grid seems to be the optimal spacing to both detect someone, like there's a smaller likelihood that you'll miss someone, but also you can cover more area. You could certainly probe a tighter area, but it slows down the speed of the transceiver. So after probing these 3 times, rescuers then take a step forward of about 20 inches, about 50 centimeters. Sometimes this cord, it's called a guide-on cord, is used by 2 people, and it will both keep people lined up as well as have marking at 50 centimeters to improve spacing. And with a group rescue, flags are usually set along the flank of the search area to show what area has already been searched. And then the leader issues commands: probe left, probe center, probe right, advance, and kind of runs this team. The team can be bystanders. It doesn't require a lot of skilled folks. You can train people on the spot, but you do need the rescue gear, and these are relatively slow process compared to our signal search or course search, where we can almost run on the snow surface. So let's consider what you do on a probe strike. This is true whether it's part of a probe line or a transceiver search or spot probing. One is to yell it out like, strike, or I've got something, right? You want to keep your probe in place to confirm. Maybe a buddy is right near you and can probe while yours stays in place. If not, you can really pay attention to where you are and just come out and probe a little bit around it to try to confirm the size and feel of the strike. You want to leave your probe in place once you have confirmed the strike. This prevents you from walking on the patient, protects their airway. It also helps you stay on target while you're shoveling. Without a probe, it's very likely you're going to drift to the side as you're shoveling and throwing out the snow from your excavation. The probe strike completes the search, right? The search began with that clues search, went through our 3 stages of the transceiver search. The probe strike completes our search, and then it's time for our rescue, our excavation, shoveling. Shoveling is usually the most time-consuming part of the rescue. Shoveling a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot deep block of compacted snow, that block of snow weighs about a ton, 2,000 pounds. So if one person is doing that shoveling, they're going to have to move 2,000 pounds of snow approximately. There's a couple of shoveling strategies. One is called strategic shoveling. This is appropriate if there is 1 to 4 rescuers on the surface. This is typical of backcountry skiers or sledders or maybe patrollers doing an avalanche mitigation route where there might be 1 rescuer. You want to start downhill of the probe strike. That avoids creating this like a cone-shaped hole down to the person. It protects the victim's airway, keeps you from standing on them. If the burial is, say, 1 meter or less, which you'll know by your probe strike, you can basically just take 1 step downhill and begin shoveling in. If it's more than 1 meter, the rule of thumb is to start downhill approximately 1.5 times the burial depth. You'll know the burial depth by your stroke. But kind of as a rule of thumb, you can just, if it's a deeper burial, you can just take 2 steps downhill, right? Your goal really is to shovel in to the tip of that probe, because that's where you know the victim is. Not down at an angle, but kind of horizontally into the tip of that probe. As you're shoveling, you want to move snow to the sides first. If you throw it downhill, you might create a dam. When your hole gets like knee to thigh deep, then you can start throwing the snow downhill after you've moved it off to the side. You're aiming for a hole that's going to be about a wingspan wide. That's going to let you excavate the person. It's going to also let you move sort of horizontally to get to their airway. And that's your goal, to get to the airway. If you come up on a leg or a belt or a part of a backpack or an arm, you identify that body part that you located and then travel toward their airway. Your goal is to obviously get to their airway and then to also remove snow, sort of brow to belt, that might be preventing their chest from expanding as you want to restore their breathing or facilitate their breathing if they already are. When you're shoveling in this strategic shoveling technique, you're really trying to be efficient and not move snow multiple times. Maybe with 4 people, you get folks moving snow multiple times. But if you have 1 or 2 rescuers, you don't want to be moving the same snow multiple times, because that's burning calories. And you've got a limited amount of energy to move a lot of snow in a short amount of time. Another type of shoveling, and this is more commonly done when you have a large group, is called conveyor belt shoveling. It's appropriate when you've got a lot of people, a lot of calories. Basically, you're forming a V formation of multiple shovelers. Everyone's moving snow back. You don't care if it's being touched multiple times. You're just excavating like an excavation machine. The person on the front should only be there for 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes at the most. The goal is just to move them out. Person on the front may say, I can do it, I can do it. They got energy, they need to be tapped out and moved. It's like hockey, boy, just a minute up front burning. And this conveyor belt shoveling can move a lot of snow in a short amount of time. It's appropriate during group rescue, like a search and rescue team, or a patrol, a large number of patrollers arriving en masse, or when there's a lot of bystanders available. Moves a lot of snow, requires a lot of people. Shoveling summary: leave the probe in place. Leave it in place. You want to shovel towards the tip. Your initial priority is to open the airway, not to extract the person. Open the airway. You want to get them breathing. You want to start downhill. The distance you start will depend on the depth that they're buried. Move the snow to the side first. This picture is a really deep burial. It was 10 feet deep. You can see the snow level is actually high, and we had to dig tiers to get down, and this is on the flats, so it creates that cone-shaped hole, which we normally try to avoid. I want to touch on a few medical consideration, but really this is brief. You really should take a CPR class. Even if you're not a backcountry traveler, you should probably know how to do CPR. And boy, if you can afford the time, taking a wilderness first responder course is high value and will really help you in your outdoor activities. So your initial goal is the ABCs, right? So A is for airway. So our goal is to get to their airway. It's likely that their mouth will be packed with snow or ice, so you want to extract that. They may have an ice in their trachea, so as you would learn in the CPR class, you treat this as a foreign airway obstruction and would remove it with compressions. Next, you want to know if they are breathing, and if not, you want to breathe for them, as in provide rescue breaths. And then you want to see if they're circulating, as if they have a pulse, and if they don't, you would do compressions. A lot of CPR now is taught as compressions only, where we don't give breaths, but we just do compressions. But I want to note that the protocol for avalanche victims is still rescue breathing. Most respiratory arrest and cardiac arrest of avalanche victims is a result of respiratory arrest first. So breathing for them can restore their respirations. So go after their airway, breathe for them, and then do compressions if they don't have a heart rate. We want to stabilize traumatic injuries. If they have fractured bones or injuries to their extremities, we want to stabilize them to reduce pain and further damage. And then we want to keep them warm. When they're buried, the snow's about 30 degrees, and so it's cool, but for the backcountry, it's not that cold. But you bring them onto the surface. One is it's likely the air temperature is going to be colder than the snow temperature, but the other is that you've got moving air or wind, and folks will cool off really quickly after you've extracted them from the snow. So you want to wrap them up with blankets, shells, keep the wind off them, remove wet clothing, and add insulation. It's likely they're going to be there a long time, protecting them from the cold, slowing the onset of hypothermia. It's an important part of these medical considerations. And then transportation. I mentioned I can only touch on this, but if you have a successful rescue, it's likely that the victim is going to be injured or at least have missing gear and is going to need to be transported. And transportation takes a lot of time. Maybe you're in a location and the weather is conducive to a helicopter, but it's quite likely that they're going to need to be pulled out, dragged out on some kind of sled or tarp. And man, this is really takes a lot of effort, especially if it's in a tarp. And so somewhere along this process, you will have had to call for other people for help or resources. Hopefully you did this once you ensured that that person was breathing. It can take many hours and a lot of folks to do these evacuations. This inset picture shows someone wrapped up in a tarp type rescue sled. They get secured in, then you pull them out with ropes or webbing attached to that device. It's worth it if you have the time to try doing this sometime before you actually have to, and you'll understand the challenges and the appropriate gear that you'll need to accomplish this on your own. So we've covered rescue. I think it's important to touch on some common rescue mistakes. These can be divided in a few categories. One is group behavior. This is often either a lack of leadership, just no one's taking charge. There's a lot of redundancy, your tasks not being performed. Lack of scene safety. Someone doesn't consider scene safety. In the clues end, it can be either failure to identify the last seen area, so you're searching locations that you should have known there was no possibility of been there, or you're not searching high probability areas that you would have recognized had you known the last seen area. Failing to identify clues on the surface, or contaminating the surface with rescue or gear by moving clues, so you slow down the search. During the transceiver search, some of the mistakes can be having too many people doing a signal search. If a slide is only a couple 100 feet wide, you probably only need 3 people or 4 people to do the search. You don't need a dozen people doing a signal search. Those other resources could be deploying probes and shovels, or looking for clues, or calling for help, or doing another task. People transmitting while they're still on the surface is a big problem. You see this frequently in training, as well as in real rescues. People doing the signal search too wide, so they miss the victim because they were between a zig and zag and they weren't covering all of the terrain adequately. And beginning to shovel without the probe strike, so going from the transceiver search immediately to shovel. And then the mistake is seeking outside help. Either folks seek it too soon, they waste time that should have been used helping the victim survive, getting the victim's airway open, or they call too late, so they get them all the way out, they've treated medical stuff, and then they realize, oh, we're going to need help getting this person out of here, and they've delayed rescue by a significant amount of time. Here's our summary. Do a scene size up, right? Consider safety, gain situational awareness. We do a clue search, that's our visual search. We do our transceiver search, that's zigzagging less than 100 meters between zigs and zags, then following the area until we're close, then doing a really efficient, methodical bracket to find the shortest distance. We then begin probing. We probe at 10-inch intervals in an expanding circle or a spiral, and then we shovel with a probe in place, starting downhill. Thank you for watching this video. I do think a video is a good way to cover a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time. But as I said at the beginning, this cannot replace hands-on training and a course by a professional on snow, as well as your frequent practice. Avalanche rescue skills are perishable. It's easy to lose these skills. So you should be practicing them throughout the season, and preferably choosing partners who want to practice these skills throughout the season as well. Thanks for watching.